Hello, everyone. So thank you very much for joining our event, SmartNet, establishing global knowledge network to achieve a productive ocean. So I'm Sana Chiba from PICES Secretariat, also the co-chair of the SmartNet. So what is SmartNet? SmartNet is the endorsed program proposed by ICES and PICES, and this is a networking program which aims to establish a global knowledge network for ocean science. So the major objective of this event are the first to introduce SmartNet to global community and to produce networking opportunities with potential partner organizations, collaborators, and the stakeholders to achieve our common goals. The SmartNet has several key themes to tackle, such as climate fishery networks and the ecosystem-based management, the socio-ecological environmental system, including human dimension, also cross-cutting issues such as capacity development. So we hope to advance progress around these key themes through the global network. And this is a 2-hour event. The first, we have 8 Ignite talks of panelists listed here. And that is followed by open discussion by these panelists. And we have some Q&A session during the at the beginning of the discussion time. So if you have a question to speakers, please write it down in the chat box, or you can directly ask them during the discussion session. But anyway, we expect a lot of lively discussion, please, so join the discussion. And these are the key questions for discussion, which I shared with all of you a couple of days ago. Okay, then at last, sorry, at last, please don't forget to mute yourself when the others are speaking. So now let me introduce the first speaker, Rebecca Martin from the Tura Foundation, Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific. And she's talking about the introduction to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So Rebecca, now you can show your screen.
Yes, thank you so much, Sene. Can you see that?
Not yet.
How about now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Excellent, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Sene, and to all the SmartNet organizers from ICES and PICES for the opportunity to today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the executive director, as Sene said, for the Tula Foundation's Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific Ocean. We're one of the few Decade Collaborative Centers that are first to be endorsed by the UN International Oceanographic Commission under UNESCO in support of the Ocean Decade. As a regional collaborative center, our aim is to make the Ocean Decade a success in the Northeast Pacific. And that region includes the coastal and open ocean off of the US and Canadian West Coast from Alaska to California and everything in between, with extensions to Baja California, Mexico, and Hawaii as the decade progresses. So today I'm here to introduce and help orient all of you to the Ocean Decade for those of you that maybe are less familiar. So in 2018, the UN through UNESCO designated the decade of 2021 to 2030 as the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And this was to boost international coordination and cooperation in research and scientific programs for better management of our ocean and coastal resources. Its vision is ocean science, the science we need for the ocean we want, which is really about mobilizing science that's fit for purpose. So how do we actually do science that helps us support sustainable development? And I should say that science is really broadly defined under the Ocean Decade. It's the physical and natural and social sciences, as well as indigenous and local knowledge. So important to recognize that it's not just about, science, it's really about integrating multiple ways of knowing. The mission is to catalyze transformative ocean science for solutions for sustainable development, connecting people in our ocean. So this is about mobilizing scientists and communities, industry and governments to address critical priorities and needs of the oceans and people, synthesizing knowledge and identifying knowledge gaps to help guide future collaborative research that's solutions focused, and that really contributes to a wide variety of solutions. So policy solutions, technology development, innovation. It's about co-designing and co-delivering knowledge in a multi-stakeholder environment, and really about bridging that science, policy, and societal dialogues and reaching across disciplines and ways of knowing, as I mentioned. And lastly, a real emphasis on building capacity and sharing data and tools. So to identify and develop the science we need to move from the ocean that we have to the ocean that we want, the Ocean Decade and the global community identified 7 outcomes that we're all aiming to achieve in this decade. So those include a clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean like we're talking about today, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, a predicted ocean, and an inspiring and engaging ocean. To get these outcomes, we really need to tackle the major challenges facing the oceans. And there have been 10 that have been identified by the global community as part of the Ocean Decade. So for example, protecting and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, sustainably feeding the global population, developing a sustainable and equitable ocean economy, and developing skills, knowledge, and technology for all. And I also want to mention, for those of you that maybe aren't aware, there's an implementation plan that was developed by for the Ocean Decade, and it can be found online and really describes these in a more fulsome way and fully lays out the framework. So how do we address these challenges? Well, it's about working through this knowledge to action framework. So as I mentioned, identifying what we know and what do we need to know to inform sustainable solutions, generating knowledge and understanding through synthesis or bringing together different forms of knowledge or collecting new information, and ultimately increasing the use of that knowledge to inform solutions. And the way that the Ocean Decade is structured is through these decade actions. These are really those tangible initiatives that help us meet these objectives and move us from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. These are the global programs like SmartNet. There are also projects that are more regionally focused or really focused on a particular topic or need. Can be activities which are more sort of short-term, one-off kinds of things that sort of move us along that arc of work. And ultimately, there's also contributions, which are really in-kind contributions to the decade. Currently, what Ocean Decade actions get endorsed through a process developed by the Decade Coordination Unit and the Decade Advisory Board that's run under the International Oceanographic Commission. And currently, the 3rd call for Decade actions is open now. It's open until October 2022. This is for Decade programs and Decade projects. These are the current focuses on Challenge 3, Sustainable Blue Food, and Challenge 4, Sustainable Ocean Economies. And there are 16 programs that are also inviting project submissions. There's also a focus on Africa and the Pacific Small Island, or as we like to say, Big Ocean developing states. And programs like SmartNet are also accepting these types of projects. Also, activities and contributions like workshops and conferences can be submitted for endorsement, but those are on a rolling basis, so those can be submitted anytime. And all the information on how to be part of the Ocean Decade, how to contribute, how to be part of a global stakeholder forum are on the Ocean Decade website. So I encourage you to sign up and look there. And lastly, I just want to emphasize, what do we do? What does being endorsed mean? What does it get us to? So partly being part of the Ocean Decade means bringing formal recognition to the activities that are part of the Ocean Decade, which helps to amplify the work. It helps make it attractive to funders. There isn't funding that's associated with the decade, but it can help support and mobilize new resources being put towards ocean activities. It serves as an umbrella and strengthens international and multi-stakeholder collaboration, like the work that's being done by ICES and PICES, and leverages those global and regional networks and strengthens them. Ultimately, it supports co-design and elevates the voices of community members, especially marginalized community members. That's one of the biggest aims of the Ocean Decade, and ultimately accelerates solutions in the face of rapid change. So I would like to invite you to get involved and stay connected. We'll be helping to connect folks to the Ocean Decade for our region and also globally. We really recommend connecting through SmartNet, as well as through the Ocean Decade Global Stakeholder Forum. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sane and just say thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the next speaker is Stephen Bograd and Jorn Summit, the two lead of SmartNet. So they will talk about the SmartNet overview. So please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Sanai, and thank you for that introduction to the decade, Rebecca. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm excited today to talk about the SmartNet program. This is the program that's hosting this event. And so SmartNet stands for Sustainability of Marine Ecosystems through Global Knowledge Networks. So we're a program that was endorsed last year by the UN Decade of Ocean Science in the first round of endorsements. And we are jointly sponsored by two organizations, ICES, which is the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, and PICES, which is the North Pacific Marine Science Organization. And so we are intergovernmental organizations that are dedicated to the creation and sharing of scientific knowledge to meet the needs of our communities in a changing ocean. And so a primary goal of our SmartNet program is to continue our collaborations between these two organizations, but also to facilitate partnerships and joint activities with communities outside of our convention areas, and especially with developing countries, with small island developing states, and especially with a focus on facilitating solutions for global problems in the ocean. So we really see the UN Ocean Decade as kind of a once-in-a-career opportunity to build upon the long history that ICES and PICES have of advancing ocean science and ocean sustainability. So our ambition is that we aim to build upon and leverage the existing joint activities, partnerships, and infrastructure that ICES and PICES has developed over the years to facilitate our research and knowledge generation for our members and beyond, to share research and generate ideas through global knowledge networks. So really our aim is to be a network program where we advance understanding and the sustainable use of the ocean. And so we have created a steering committee, ICES-PICES Ocean Decade iPod steering committee that aims to coordinate the activities through the UN Ocean Decade. So SmartNet is focused on a number of key scientific themes, and these are ones that ICES and PICES has a long history of collaborating on, as well as expertise and interest. So this is in climate variability and change, fisheries and ecosystem-based management, social, ecological, environmental systems, dynamics, coastal communities and human dimensions, and of course, international capacity building and enhancement. In addition to a number of cross-cutting themes as well. And so there are different ways that we try to create and transfer knowledge. One of the key ones is through joint expert groups between ICES and PICES and our partner organizations. So these are our various working groups on specific themes, and we've listed a few here that are currently active on small pelagic fish ecology, ocean negative carbon emission, integrated ecosystem assessments for the Arctic and also the Chukchi Sea, impacts of warming on growth rates and fisheries yield, and climate change effects on marine ecosystems. And we encourage you to go to the ICES and PICES websites and learn more about these groups and what they're doing. And another venue that we aim to create and transfer knowledge is through various symposia. And so again, we're just listing a few here that ICES and PICES are involved in. This is our joint Early Career Scientist Conference, which is coming up this summer, Symposium on Small Pelagic Fish, Effects of Climate Change on the World Ocean next year, and also the Marine Socio-Ecological System Symposium. So these are the ways that we try to bring folks together, develop partnerships, and aim to develop scientific products and knowledge for transfer to other communities. Okay, so the other thing that SmartNet is really aiming to do is to develop strategies for various cross-cutting themes and approaches, and this includes promotion of early career ocean professionals, incorporation of indigenous knowledge, empowerment of women within the ocean sciences, improved science communication, partnerships with small island developing states, and innovation for greener ocean science. So these are some of the really key themes and activities that are really needed to make the ocean decade a success. And then finally, just thinking about the SmartNet structural landscape and our strategy for how we're going to operate. There's really four elements here. Of course, the knowledge production, and the foundation of that is the science that ICES and PICES is collaborating with on. Knowledge sharing, and so that's the sharing of data, data products, and just scientific information in general. Networking, and so that's with partner organizations, with other Ocean Decade programs, and this is what we're trying to do here with this workshop. And engagement, and this would include empowerment of diverse communities and incorporation of local and traditional knowledge. And so the way that we're aiming to do this is, first establishing a strategy for joint research and data sharing, identifying and strengthening relationships with partners, which again is a key objective of this event today. And then as we mature, developing mechanisms for network governance and promoting capacity development. And so I think that's where I'll leave you with today. And I look forward to hearing from the other speakers on the panel. Thank you.
You're on mute, Sane.
Oh, that's embarrassing. So the next speaker is Casey Mills from Gulf of Marine Research Institute. And her talk is about a climate fisheries nexus in Indo's a fish score program.
All right, I am attempting to figure out how to find the screen I want to share with you. So I may just share everything and we will eventually.
You should be able to just share the app or the program that you want.
Can you see my slide now?
Yeah, it looks great. See, we can see it.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you all for joining today. I am Kathy Mills and I am one of the leads for a program called Fish Score, Fisheries Strategies for Changing Oceans and Resilient Ecosystems by 2030. We have a number of additional initial partners on this program and are looking to also expand the network of partners participating as we develop further. So our program really emerged from some work that many of us are already involved in through a SNAP working group on climate resilient fisheries, where we recognize that fisheries around the world, as well as the benefits that we are able to obtain from them, are being affected by many elements of climate change, from warming across the world's oceans to acidification, to changes in storminess and storm patterns and sea level rise that affect the populations that provide harvest to fisheries, as well as infrastructure that supports our fisheries. So this is altering, where and when people can fish, what they can catch at what levels, and how efficiently they can move that, from harvest through to markets. So in this working group, we are thinking about, a lot of our focus has been on attributes of fishery systems across their ecological, socioeconomic, and governance dimensions that support climate resilience. And we've also been linking these attributes to hazards and risk that are being faced by fisheries around the world, thinking about adaptation approaches and other interventions that could buffer some of the climate impacts, and strategies that can be used to enhance the attributes that are necessary to sustain climate resilient fisheries as we look ahead. So we are really hoping to leverage and expand from this work through the program components of FishScore. So the goal of FishScore is really to sustain fisheries as a source of food and jobs while protecting ocean ecosystems in the face of climate change. So our goal is, multi-pronged to really have, healthy oceans as well as vibrant fisheries and equitable benefits from those fisheries as we look ahead. The objectives of FishScore will be to establish an international network of partners, and partners we have broadly defined that to include not only scientists, but participants in the fisheries themselves, fishery managers and community practitioners, as well as policy experts in the fisheries arena. So establishing this international network to develop information and tools that can support resilience assessments and planning, to build also really close scientist and practitioner collaborations in local and regional fisheries, to apply the products to those fishery examples, to use them to develop resilient strategies in those particular fisheries, but then also to create a feedback loop where we learn from those experiences to shape the products and tools we might be developing that we hope will be more broadly applicable. And then finally, a key objective is to really connect global ocean science to societal benefits at local and regional scales, and to draw learnings from all of those experiences. So I introduced the sort of core components of FishScore, but we really envision FishScore as a program playing out in a manner that's very iterative and co-developed with the partners in the network and in local and regional fisheries. And we hope that through this work, we will be able to achieve some outputs that support system-oriented understandings and approaches to climate resilient fisheries, provide information and tools that are broadly relevant for assessing and identifying strategies to support climate resilience in fisheries that are both broadly relevant as well as context appropriate. And then to provide high-level science and policy recommendations as well that ultimately promote sustainability of marine ecosystems, fisheries, as well as equity of the benefits we derive from them. So this provides a general overview of the components of FishScore. We are really still sort of standing up this program and are actively looking for collaborations and potential partners. And so I think there's a lot of potential connections to other programs we'll be hearing from today. And I would encourage you to reach out. It would be great to talk if you are involved in other programs or efforts or projects that might be connected to climate resilient fisheries that we could build some bridges to as we further develop our plans and launch FishScore as it really starts taking shape. So thank you all.
Thank you, Casey. So let me introduce next speakers, Luis Tupas and Michael Robotham from Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research. Their talk is about a perspective on local and traditional knowledge sharing.
Thank you,
Please
Dr. Chiba. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Luis Tupas with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I am the current steering committee chair of the Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research. I'm also the chair of the Pacific Sub-Regional Committee, which is the region that's mostly going to be involved with working with PICES. And our organization is not just a dealing with ocean and marine or aquatic sciences and community development, but also we are also working in the terrestrial area. So Dr. Chibis, did you see, is this my next slide? Do you see the next slide? Okay, thank you. So the left panel talks about the Asia Pacific Network and its membership countries, and the right on the white panel shows our focus areas, and you can see a lot of focus areas there, including food, water, and energy, as well as our human dimensions. And we achieve our strategic goals through 4 different activities: regional research, capacity development, science policy linkages, and community engagement. This is very much kind of in tune with what PICES does as well. So every year we have a call for proposals. Last year was launched in November 2021, and we're going through the review process as well. But each region gets to select some very specific topics of interest for the region. So for the Pacific, we were looking for 4 topics: global and indigenous knowledge, relation to relocation, food security, water security; also global knowledge and indigenous knowledge for adaptation and disaster risk reduction. We are interested in proposals for regional climate downscaling in the Pacific, and also microplastics and marine plastic debris. So those were our focus areas for the proposals launched, the call for proposals launched in November. I'd just like to contrast it also with our counterparts from the temperate East Asia, where they were looking at a lot of climate-related issues. And temperate East Asia would include Korea, Japan, and China. So those are the topics that we have chosen in relation to all the other topics that the APN member countries are interested in. So I'm here to talk about knowledge and indigenous knowledge in global knowledge and indigenous knowledge in the Pacific. And we know there's been a long, strong history of these types of knowledge. The point I want to make in this slide is that the repository of this knowledge is in cultural protocols, languages, and in oral traditions. And they are well preserved within remote peripheral communities, especially on outer islands in these Pacific areas. But they are used to as strategies for sustaining livelihoods in the face of adversity. In particular, for food and water security, we have many examples in the Pacific about how food acquisition was optimized using fish traps, and then what we refer to as traditional taboo declarations, which actually sustain things. So they make a declaration: you cannot fish in this area until a certain time period. And then they do that, and it's respected throughout the community. So they already had an idea of the cycles that take place so that reproduction and repopulation can take place. Then the other aspect about indigenous knowledge with regards to food security is not just where or how they obtain food, but how they preserve food and store food to anticipate future events, because there are tropical cyclones in the Pacific. But they were adept also at these techniques so that food can be kept beyond its initial stage of harvesting. And they were also adept at finding other water resources like coconuts in times of drought. So we are very much aware of these types of strategies in the Pacific. And one key to it, which then has become one of the historical facts of how populations moved about, was because they moved from place to place, also partly because they would fish in one place and then they would leave it for the cycle to reproduce itself and then fish in another place. So there was mobility in the way they did things. So they were not stuck in one area. In coping with future climate change, there are ways that indigenous knowledge combined with global knowledge will be advantageous to finding solutions for them. And we have found out that in the Pacific Islands, what we will call Western understanding and approaches to climate change have not been very successful because they ignore the traditional knowledge and as well as the worldview of the Pacific Islanders or the communities in the Pacific. And they value things in different ways. So there is a spiritual value to certain things, more than a scientific perspective, and they have traditions, they have culture practices. So we have to balance that out as well when trying to understand how to put together global knowledge and indigenous knowledge to achieve solutions for climate change. So one of the things that our research supports is the creation of publications that are used primarily for, hopefully for influencing policy. So policy relevant science is what we're after. And this is one example. The title is on the left side, the Local and Indigenous Knowledge, Hydrometeorological Disaster Risk Reduction for Small Island Communities. And this was supported by APN through the project listed on the right side. The small island communities were in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Timor-Leste. And this was a UNESCO Jakarta publication. The publication itself has 4 sections. One has to do with the background and basic concepts of the study. The second consists of the country-specific lessons obtained from those 3 areas. Sections 3 and 4 are equally important because it is a policy brief in section 3 that deals with integrating local and indigenous knowledge. And in section 4, another policy brief incorporating these knowledge for disaster and climate education. So this is one of the objectives in our publications. We just don't publish the science, we publish what is important for policymakers to understand so that it's relevant to the policies they're making. And both policy briefs here include policy actions and tools. We are not dictating policy, but we're trying to provide scientific information for it. Now, here is something very recent from New Zealand and something that we can work on in a future discussion. It is the response to UN Decade of Science that New Zealand has decided that they will use indigenous knowledge and customs as their central guiding principle to respond to climate change, for example. And it's part of their what they call Matuaranga Maori. It's part of the Marine Cultural Health Monitoring Tools. And they've come up with a cultural health index that enables the Ngai Tahu, which is the dominant Maori tribe in the South Island of New Zealand, to establish restoration targets, harvest strategies, and also incorporates a range of environmental indicators. So this is something for a future discussion when New Zealand is more into, further into this development. So this slide deck will be shared, and then you will be able to access our publication library, our bulletins, our policy briefs, and even the updates. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. So the next speaker is Peter Freeman from the University of Rhode Island, and his talk is about this as a USAID Our Fish, Our Future activity. Please go ahead. Peter, are you with us?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just pulling up my presentation here. All right. You see it all right?
This is a, yeah, this is a presenter mode, so you can switch the to the you know, the slide presentation mode.
Okay. Switch, you say? Does it not look good?
Just we can see the 2 slide next to next, the present slide and next slide. So yeah, that's a switch.
How about that?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Well, thank you, everybody. It's nice to present here. I took the instructions of an Ignite talk maybe a little too seriously, so it'll be quick and fast. So but it's nice to have a little bit more time. I can slow down. But so my name is Peter Freeman. I'm a research associate at the Coastal Resources Center in the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. And I'm here today to talk about a new USAID funded project that we are starting up called Our Fish, Our Future. It's part of a portfolio of two USAID activities in the Pacific Islands targeting sustainable coastal fisheries management. And I'm going to present some of our thoughts and questions about knowledge networks and building communities of practice. And yes, so how did we get here? Our project was launched at our Oceans Conference in Palau in April, where some of our project partners met some folks from ICES and PICES and NOAA, and had some good discussions and realized that we, in a lot of ways, are trying to do a lot of the same things in the same space and time. So we're both at an interesting moment and kind of poised to learn a lot from each other as SmartNet begins and figures out what it's going to do, and we kind of do the same. So by way of background on our project, the goal of Our Fish, Our Future is to address social and ecological drivers of coastal IUU fishing. So it's illegal, underreported, and unregulated fishing. It's 5 years. We're in year one. $15 million project. Our 4 implementing partners in our consortium: University of Rhode Island, the locally managed marine area network, LMMA network, WWF, and the University of South Pacific. And it's a regional project, so it spans 12 countries in the Pacific Islands region, but with a focus on 6, 3 in Micronesia and 3 in Melanesia. You see there. And at the heart of our program design is what we're calling a networked extension approach. And the network extension approach is to drive collaborative design, piloting, refining, and the eventual scaling of good practices, tools, and approaches in coastal fisheries management. And what is really key here is the collaborative nature of what we would like to achieve, and setting up, basically playing matchmaker for joint learning initiatives. We want to move through these phases fairly quickly to kind of allow some iterations and some adaptive management and program design. And really the core mechanism to drive our scaling and extension approach is what we're calling the EAFM community of practice, which I see now is not to be confused with an early career, maybe ocean practitioners acronym. But this community practice is intended to be interactive, peer-to-peer, community that is really set up to fuel or support collaborative innovation and problem solving. We really want to focus on community level engagement and trying to make those connections and set up those spaces to allow for locally led design of approaches and tools and many of the project outputs and approaches that we're going to pilot and scale. A lot of our project partners will be available to provide social learning support, and we'll have 2 full-time ECOP facilitators, one in Micronesia and one in Melanesia. So why community practice? Why collaborative learning initiative? We believe that an ecosystem approach to fisheries management and the nested the transformation across kind of the nested systems of governance that are require institutional change. And you know, while we not only believe in this statement here, we've seen it work in the past. And what we really like to focus on these projects is reducing transaction costs to collective action, which is what we've seen work on collaborative learning projects in the past, and kind of a theme for the rest of my presentation and kind of what we're thinking about right now. So, given, you know, a $15 million 5-year project spread over 6 countries, with the expectation that learning outcomes can apply to 12 countries, we're trying to achieve deep interaction and creative work at the community level across a diverse and vast geographic and cultural landscape. You might be asking, what will the ECOP look like? And to that, I say, very good question. We don't know yet. And that is where we are coming from today. We're starting something new, which is exciting. And of course, we have done this before. And as always, we have a lot on our minds, which is what I would like to present to you today for discussion. So first, our work in the past on the collaborative learning has taught us that this is a very critical time for joint ventures. Origin is destiny in the sense that the founding framework of these initiatives have very strong implications for the structure that they take and follow, and the motivation of their members and the activity. And those two factors are very strong determinants of the long-term success of these initiatives. So it's exciting right now. You know, we don't have anything down on paper, and we would love to hear the experiences of others on the call. If you found yourself at this stage and this point of time in the past. So what's on our minds right now? You know, I think 5 things. You know, at least plenty, but these are kind of five themes that, you know, we thought would be interesting to bring to the group here, and kind of present what we're thinking right now. So with number 1, how not to reinvent the wheel. The good news is that we do not have the funds to reinvent the wheel, so that's out. And plus, we have partnered with some pretty big wheels already, including the LMMA network, who has been doing collaborative, interactive coastal management for a very long time through a network structure, a learning network. And they've been doing this for a long time, have gained a lot of traction and know how to do it better than anyone in our project geography, at least. So our other 2 main implementing partners, WWF in the Pacific, also has a network approach and their own scaling framework, and USP could be seen as an educational network. And also the Pacific Community, SPC, is works a lot on providing knowledge hubs for different topics, and is currently working on one for coastal fisheries under the sister activity to Our Fish, Our Future. So SPC is also implementing a similar project similar activity under the same project. So I'm very curious to learn more about how ICES and PICES are themselves looking to expand into this geography, and generally how they approach expanding into new crowded spaces, and to expand extend the wheel metaphor too far? You know, do they see problems with missing spokes, missing tires, missing chains? You know, what can people really bring to support each other right now at this point in time? And you know, we think about this very kind of open-mindedly at this point because we are a blank slate. And one of the luxuries of a USAID-funded project is the flexibility to find, you know, kind of and really target leverage points in the system, and see if we can do something, you know, maybe unconventional and test it and really see what works. So some of our thoughts along those lines right now are kind of going back to the question, you know, how to grease the wheel with you know, given all the structures and networks that already exist, you know, what's the special sauce here? You know, what can be provided if you do have a blank slate? Is there like a catalytic agent here? Is there, you know, some sort of stroke of genius that you can't necessarily bottle, you know, or really is it something that, you know, it's harder, you know, it's difficult to figure out. Is it some fairy dust that you can't necessarily tease out, but you've seen in the past? One of our thoughts along this line is really trying to focus on building social capital within existing networks. This here is a learning question that we have as part of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan on the activity. And really we're looking at how to build it, how to measure it, how to invest in it, how much does it really grease the wheel, so to speak, in terms of transaction costs. Another thought we're really thinking about is kind of that last mile question with transaction costs. You know, with logistics, they say it's, you know, 53% of delivery costs. So how do you, what can you do to really reduce the cost of that last mile delivery of knowledge to stakeholders at that level, especially if a lot of it exists in kind of environments that are more used to relying on technologies than others. You know, there's kind of a network of networks approach or model, but you know, what does it take to make them work? What would be the catalyst? What are the logistical considerations, and what sort of transaction costs are often overlooked when kind of pursuing this model? Another idea we have is network of networkers. We want to make sure that it is you know, sufficiently staffed with people who are dedicated and have the resources to work the phones, so to speak. We have one facilitator in each sub-region, and we're really curious about how other networks have invested in these people, and maybe even, you know, connected them with other networks in other networks, other networkers in other networks. So again, come to you with a lot of ideas, and you know, a humble appeal to you all that we're at the beginning of something, and we have a lot of flexibility, and we're very excited to be here discussing you know, our thoughts and your thoughts with SmartNet. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And the next speaker is Selena Light from CEPAS. And her talk is about the perspective on MPAs and fisheries from Blue Belt program.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I'll just jump straight into it. So yes, as Sanai has mentioned, today I'll be providing an overview of the kind of perspectives of fisheries kind of management and advice that we've been kind of bringing together under the Blue Belt program for the MPAs involved in the Blue Belt, so the UK overseas territories. So I've included a few of the organisations, and obviously this is UK government funded, but there are also a number of other institutes that have been involved and continue to be involved in this work. So I'll just go straight into an overview of what I'll talk about today. So I think the previous talks have kind of provided a good context of, marine protected areas and their importance. So obviously understanding and protecting and helping to restore biodiversity is crucial, but also improving fishery sustainability and promoting sustainable use is especially important for some of the UK overseas territories. So today, you can see some of the UK OTs that are involved in Blue Belt at the moment in the map on the screen at the moment. Sorry, it's very small. I think the number will be increasing in the coming years as additional UK OTs from the Caribbean are included in this. But I'm mostly involved in the work for St. Helena, which is in the South Atlantic, close to Ascension Islands, EEZ. And this is the MPA, so there's a lot of water there. It's a big MPA out to the 200 nautical mile mark. So I'll just be talking about the work we've been doing there with the St. Helena government over the last few years. So just a bit of context before I go into more of the kind of nuts and bolts of how it all works. There are a number of important fish species that are targeted within St. Helena waters. Most importantly, the tropical tunas like yellowfin, big eye, and skipjack. But there's also a number of groundfish species, including some endemic, so species that are only found within St. Helena waters like grouper, deepwater bullseye lobster, and a few other key species. So this kind of just gives an overview of the kind of fish that are targeted. And I think with one of the largest catches has been for the tropical tunas, which I think they can catch up to about 400 tons of tropical tuna. I think that the max was about 10 years ago now. But usually is about 200 tons or so by the rod and reel vessels fishing within them in St. Helena waters. Now, the kind of methods we use to try and help St. Helena and then the UK OTs protect and ensure that fisheries are sustainable is kind of represented in this diagram. So I'll be digging into each of the points throughout the talk, but as an overview, the focus is firstly looking at the state and the role of the fishery, bringing together any data and evidence and providing a digestible advice report, which can be used to help stakeholders on island or wider communities understand why kind of decisions are being made, if there's an update, for example, on fisheries management. And then that information then feeds into management decisions and sometimes legislation and policy. So Blue Belt helps support getting things updated as we go. And we also try and ensure that in terms of a cycle, it depends on the species that we're looking to update and on the fisheries, but we tend to do like an annual cycle for the most important commercially targeted species to ensure that everything is up to date and appropriate management measures are enforced within the different UK OTs. So to dig a little bit deeper, trying to understand the state and the role of the fishery is obviously key. We first have to dig into things like, are the gears that they're using sustainable? You know, is it one-by-one methods or is it kind of large-scale purse seining, for example? We need to understand things like the quantities caught annually, seasonally, sizes of individuals. So, for example, if they're catching very small, like juvenile fish, that obviously needs to be looked further into to check that that's not having a big impact on the population. We also address things like abundance and distribution and connections, not only within EEZs, but also to wider regions, especially for the large migratory species like tuna. And we've also done quite a few things like productivity susceptibility assessments, which allow us to kind of get a score for each individual fish species. So you can see, you know, how at risk, for example, are some of these species based on the literature or the data that's been collected locally. In terms of the next steps, we need to understand whether there's a market that's only for the local sales and for export, and whether the kind of trend in terms of how much is being targeted is increasing or decreasing to help us understand the risk to that population. By the way, I'm sorry, you might hear small children kicking off in the background, but I'll just keep going. In terms of the data and the evidence that feed into all of this kind of profiles and information that we get, one of the most important things is the logbooks. So the local, for example, for St. Helena, the logbooks have been in place for about just over a year now, and that gives us the catch and effort for the different gears in space and time. But we also use telemetry like tagging to look at movements and genetics to look at connections between areas. And there's a focus on biological sampling. So when are the species spawning? And, you know, what's the size at which they mature? Finally, and the most important aspect is the stock assessments. So we try to implement robust stock assessments for the different species, but it all depends on the data that we've got available. So yeah, this kind of cycle just brings together all the information that we have, which helps us to inform kind of whether there's any need for a change in management. I won't go into detail on this because this is probably too dry for you all in terms of the high level, but this just shows you some of the different figures which we've produced for the most recent yellowfin tuna advice that we sent to St. Helena. So we've got, for example, the top left shows us the size of the catches and how they progress in size, and then they remain kind of quite resident. Well, there's some fidelity to St. Helena waters. We also assess things like the length and weight charts, so we can understand what kind of weight an individual tuna is, so we can estimate that from the logbooks. Finally, we've got things like we do satellite tagging and electronic tagging to look at the tracks of yellowfin. So you can see in this chart, we've got the movements of the yellowfin, both within St. Helena waters and slightly to the north and out. And finally, we've got things like biomass assessments where it's possible to look at, you know, the quantities of biomass that are potentially available within these waters, so that we can help understand kind of what the kind of local biomass is and how much could be taken safely. So all of this feeds into like an advice report, which is obviously used locally to produce to stakeholders on island, including fishermen, tour operators, and St. Helena government. And we also ensure that for species like the tunas and the billfish, all the data goes to the regional fisheries management organizations, like, for example, ICAT in the Atlantic. Next, the most important phase is the stakeholder engagement. So I did have this as a separate point, but then I realized it's pretty much, you know, it's required throughout. You need to ensure that the community are aware of what's happening and the key stakeholders are involved in every aspect of the kind of fisheries management and updates. So we focus on ensuring they get to see the data and the evidence, and they can review and feed into that. And if they're not happy or would like things updated, then we ensure that we do make those changes. We also make sure that there's management decisions carefully thought out, because obviously sometimes changing things like quotas or when fishing can occur can have big impacts on the social or economic aspects for stakeholders. We need to know obviously all the different stakeholders' perspectives, so that can be fed in as well, so that it's all integrated. So yeah, this phase just focuses on ensuring that information is shared, is transparent, and that there's good communication throughout. The final phases are obviously updating and ensuring that the management measures are appropriate and effective at keeping the fishery stock sustainable. And obviously, as I said before, for some of the highly migratory species, ensuring that the information is updated at the regional fisheries management organisation level. Finally, on occasion, there's a need to update things like legislation and policy. So there's support there that's provided to help ensure that that is up to date. It doesn't have to happen every year, but it's good to keep an eye on whether that is up to date and relevant. And finally, the review process. We try and keep that annual, where it's just minor updates to the data and the evidence to check whether anything needs to change. But we also need to keep an eye on whether the state and the role of the fisheries change. So if there's increasing trends, if more fishing vessels are starting to target, we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that things are sustainable going forward. And finally, yeah, in the coming years, believe what we'll also be focusing a bit more on climate resilience. So ensuring that, you know, as things are changing, you know, there's a proactive approach to keeping an eye on what that could mean for some of the big species that, you know, for example, aren't bound by, you know, these tuna species can go anywhere in the Atlantic, and with big changes, we need to understand what impacts that could have for the local communities. I think that's me. Yeah, just thank you for listening, and there's more information, including a lot of the advice reports and other reports from the Marine Management Organization on the site here, if there's more information you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarina. So next speaker is early career scientist, Kshubu Jigru from the Hakai Institute. So she's talking about capacity sharing with LDCs and SIDS.
Thank you, Snai. Does this work?
Yes.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Move around the faces so I can see the slide. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for giving me the chance today to talk about capacity sharing with least developing countries and small island developing states. For those of you who don't know me, I'm doing a postdoc at Hakai Institute and University of British Columbia, as Sanai mentioned. I have a big interest in coastal physical oceanography, and here I'm looking at shelf sea processes and coast to open ocean connectivity. But I'm originally from Mauritius, which is a small island developing state. And for those of you who don't know where it is, it's right here in the middle, in the Southwest Indian Ocean. And I do feel grateful and lucky that I've had the support, training and access to many resources in my career that that I wish many of my compatriots back home could also have. So SIDS and LDCs share certain features that make their development paths susceptible to ocean risks. Their economies are heavily reliant on the natural environment, and they tend to be also heavily dependent on public sector employment and foreign financing. This is kind of what makes them vulnerable to certain environmental and socioeconomic stresses, such as extreme weather events, coastal urbanization, as well as global health and financial crisis. I've kind of put together a list of what I think are some of the major challenges faced by SIDS and LDCs. And I have a slight bias towards Indian Ocean SIDS because that's where my exposure lies. But from my perspective, SIDS are reliable on marine resources and artisanal fishing for basic needs, and there's not enough focus on sustainability of our own resources. So ocean data is crucial to inform us. But we tend to face big long-term challenges in establishing, collecting, and processing these data. And we also generally have limited resources to buy equipment and establish strong monitoring, and particularly lack capacity to maintain or repair any damages if there are. Often we find that there's limited technical and human capacity to store, access, and process the data that do exist. And another challenge we often face is that recent advances in ocean scientific techniques, such as underwater gliders, for example, the instrument that I use here for my research, they tend to be used by and for developed countries. And this is because they are designed in developed countries and would be too expensive for SIDS or LDCs to buy, operate, and maintain without much help. Another challenge for Indian Ocean SIDS specifically is that they tend to receive less assistance in using data collected than Pacific Islands, for example, where a coordinator would facilitate regional and funded activities more than in the Indian Ocean area. And this is a governance challenge unique to the Indian Ocean region, where the islands are poorly connected. They are more sparsely distributed geographically as well. Next, I wanted to just briefly mention a little bit about my own challenges growing up in the SIDS. So from my experience, I've experienced that there's a lack of career guidance and exposure to what kind of career opportunities are available in my field. Access to local university is considered to be competitive and a privilege. And if you do make it to these limited universities in these nations, it does not necessarily mean that your degree will be recognized worldwide, which leads to limited and competitive employment within these nations, as not many people are able to go explore overseas, even after studying at a university locally. And again, I can speak from an Indian Ocean perspective, where corruption is another big issue when it comes to getting employed. And the last one on my list here is that I feel like there's some reluctance in making first steps towards international collaborations. We tend to rely a lot on spin-off benefits and tend to be a bit opportunistic. So last, I wanted to mention what do we need? What can be done to change this? Well, there's not too much we can do about the political and governance side of things from afar, but we can definitely think about inclusion and recognition of these nations' opinions with the understanding that we have different backgrounds and access to a lot of the resources. I feel we also need better science communication to the local communities in SIDS and LDCs. And next, to make even modest progress in collecting ocean data, I feel technical capacity development in these nations is essential. Often we are told the data is there and have been collected by so-and-so, but the struggle lies in the lack of specific expertise and know-how. So the need for training in how to use equipment, how to access data that has been gathered, and how to process it into information, useful information is necessary. And of course, financial support from developed countries is essential for this. I do acknowledge that this is getting better with time, and there are existing alliances that are already working on this, such as GOOSE or the Green Climate Fund and multiple others. They are setting examples, but the issue often comes down to ensuring that these systems remain operational. That's all I have, but I look forward to the discussion afterwards, and thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kush. So we have a last presentation that is by Erin Shuttleswaite. from California Sea Grant and Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And her talk is about a knowledge network as a tool for diverse engagement and effective decision-making amidst change and early career ocean professional perspective.
Great, thanks, Sanai. Is that, you can see that well? Great. So yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm really grateful for your time and attention, which I know are both scarce resources these days. I'm Erin Satterthwaite, and I'm with California Sea Grant and Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I'm part of the Ocean Decade through some global programs. And especially I'll be speaking as part of the ECOP programs, DEI task team, an advisor, and then the PICES ECOP community. And I'm really looking forward to sharing an early career perspective on knowledge networks as an effective tool for diverse engagement and decision-making amidst change. And so I'd like to just briefly mention that this is from many conversations and input from ECOP representatives from the global ECOP program, PICES and ICES. Many of you who I saw are in the crowd today, so thank you. And for me, I just want to mention these relationships really are, for me, the reason why this work is so rewarding and fun. And so I wanted to start off with this quote, which is that governance transformation can take decades, thereby revealing the need for intergenerational and coalitions of change makers who are poised to take advantage of new opportunities as they emerge. And I wanted to start with this because to me, it really underpins how we've been thinking about intergenerational participation within the Ocean Decade. And so the first part of this is to understand the intergenerational piece of this. Who are the early career ocean professionals, so what we call ECOPs, globally, and what are their priorities in the coming decade? And so to get at this, we have conducted a global survey of ECOPs to basically understand both the topical priorities as well as the barriers and opportunities for ECOPs. And so we found that ECOPs are diverse, and we had an overwhelmingly positive response to this of over 1,400 ECOPs from over 100 countries, and they had a fairly even gender distribution. And we also found that ECOPs represent a range of different sectors. And so especially academic, but also fisheries, education, and policy. And I think one of the key goals that we've been working on is to increase this sectoral diversity within the ECOP program. So in terms of priorities, interestingly, early career professionals around the world, regardless of the region, have a shared goal, which is to enhance our understanding of the effects of climate change on marine ecosystems and coastal communities. And specifically for the topic of a sustainably harvested and productive ocean, ECOPs indicated that fisheries management, marine resources, and plastic pollution were key aspects to consider. And I think in a lot of ways, this makes sense and aligns with some of our discussions today around SmartNet and a productive ocean. So then the second piece of this is really to understand what are the barriers and opportunities for ocean leaders, especially early career professionals, to really take advantage of new opportunities as they emerge and to participate meaningfully in governance transformations that are necessary for this sustainable future that we're looking forward to. And so related to this, we found that many needs were centered around support, so including things like resources, trainings, and opportunities related to effective co-design, co-production, and translation of knowledge. And this is with this diversity of groups that we've been talking about today. So underrepresented groups, diverse forms of knowledge, varied disciplines, different countries, regions, and cultures, non-traditional stakeholders, local community members. And I think a key piece of this is really thinking about this as embedded with this interconnected systems thinking and understanding. So having kind of training that really speaks to this systems way of viewing our work within the Ocean Decade. And then I'd like to also mention that these needs that were identified during the survey are what led to the foundation of the Global ECOP program. So things like mentorship and training, diversity, equity, and inclusivity, ocean literacy, as well as the development kind of more geographically of local nodes of the ECOP program. So including both regional and national nodes that have been developing. And so with that, given that social and knowledge networks provide a means for sharing knowledge, resources, and support, and facilitating unique opportunities to build trust and social capital, I thought it's fitting to segue into the question of, might social and knowledge networks be a tool for diverse engagement, such as with ECOPs, and also an effective decision-making tool amidst the rapid change that we're seeing today. And so I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and kept this short, but happy to chat more in the panel discussion. So with that, I'd like to thank you all, and really looking forward to connecting and hearing your ideas. And yeah, looking forward to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And also just thank you very much for all speakers for inspiring and very informative talks. Now I'd like to hand over to Kathleen Sheffs from the Tura Foundation and Ocean Tura Foundation and Ocean Decade Collaborative Center to moderate open discussion. So Kathleen, all yours now.
Thank you, Senai. And hello, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. And it's been, you know, an amazing array of a tour, international tour, really, of thinking about, you know, how do we grapple with fisheries management and protecting fisheries from climate change, and a whole bunch of really interesting projects. So I am sure that you have questions, comments, you know, discussion points to raise with some of the panelists and also amongst each other. So I'm happy to have, you know, I guess I'll encourage anybody who would like to turn on their video and kind of for this section of the discussion, if you wish, and feel free to, you know, unmute yourself, maybe raise a hand. There's the reaction buttons at the bottom of the screen. You can raise a hand and indicate that you have something that you'd like to add, but you're also more than welcome to, you know, pop some questions into the chat and see how we'll grab those questions out of the chat, even though I have some assistants behind the scenes to gather them up in case there's so many questions, they come fast and furious. But I guess I will start by posing a question. I'm using my moderator's privilege here to pose a question to the panelists to ask, you know, among all these projects and your work ongoing in all kinds of regions around the world, are there kind of examples that you guys can all think of from your experience or perspectives of, you know, specific projects or activities that are really help to facilitate better understanding between science and communities around climate and climate resilient or climate ready ecosystem management or fisheries management? And this is, you know, a bit pointed to help inform SmartNet, because they are really looking to understand how to best engage. And so if there are really great examples out there, I think people would be really interested in hearing about them, or interesting examples, even if they're not maybe successful examples all the time. I'll put it that way. So I guess I will ask our panelists to think for a moment about that, and I may pick on somebody. Maybe I'll pick on you, Kathy, as you're also leading a decade program. You know, that's something that SmartNet is looking to find out of this event is, you know, what are some great examples of how PICES and ICES and SmartNet can engage in this work?
Well, I don't know if I have like a specific example to point to as the exemplar of this, but I can say from my own work, which partly involves fishing community adaptation to climate change, I guess that I feel like there's so much value to that direct stakeholder and end user engagement interaction that I always learn so much from that experience. That really helps me understand what I should be driving for as a scientist in the research components of the work, but also in the product development elements of the work that we look to develop to provide information and tools that people can really use. It helps to understand what questions they're going to use them to address and how they're going to interact and engage with them. And so I think that the starting point really is that hurdle of figuring out who are the users you want to target. And it takes a lot of work to really hone in on that group. And I guess I just really want to emphasize, I think in a lot of these programs, we're all looking to do that type of engagement work. And it's not just, it's not just a delivery of information. It really is an iterative back and forth process that takes a lot of investment of time and energy, but it also needs to be sustained. It needs to be ongoing. And I think that the decadal timeframe provides a great opportunity that you often don't get in grant cycles to invest over that long time horizon. But because it doesn't align with grant cycles, it's really hard to figure out how to sustain that in an ongoing manner. And so I think that's a challenge that we will all face, but I think there are tremendous opportunities there if we can figure out how to overcome that challenge.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I am now. Sonia, did you want to comment? Thanks, awesome, perfect timing.
I thought I would leave the floor open, but before you move on, it's sort of related, but one thing that resonated with me listening to Kush's presentation was the comment that least developed countries, small island developing states, need training in using data and accessibility to data. And I think that that's something that PICES certainly and ICES too can step up a little. We do convene workshops, we do host summer schools, we do promote summer schools and other training and capacity development activities. And through SmartNet and through this network that we're pulling together now, reaching out to new partners and engaging early career ocean professionals too, I think we can do a better job of making sure that those opportunities are communicated to some of the areas where there's most need, and making sure that we bring those people in to our community to give them opportunities to use those training events, and that will hopefully engage them in the network and facilitate access to the data and the data products and tools that are needed. So I'm hoping that this is exactly the kind of thing that will help promote that, is bringing people together in one place and making sure everyone's aware. And mostly for me, it resonated because I spent some time yesterday talking about how we need to get increased registration for a summer school that's going on. So it seemed like a timely thing to make the point that we need to do better at this. And thanks for raising that, Kush.
Great. Erin, do you have a hot response to that? Or pardon me, Louis, you have your hand up first. So I will go to you first, Louis, and then I will come to you, Erin.
So APN, we're in a different position because we fund projects in country by the scientists and the researchers in those countries. And one of the things that we have strongly emphasized is working with the community. So it happens in two ways. A lot of the questions that the research is being done on are questions by the community itself. They're the ones that that the community is interested in, that the resources are within that community. So we work with them for the problem development. And then afterwards, we even have policy briefs in person, well, remotely now, with the different types of decision makers there. And that's a question I was going to ask, I think it was Erin, who are these decision makers? Because we have decision makers from those who are doing the fisheries themselves, but then there are the decision making in the communities by their elders or by the local governments, by regional governments, and by national governments. So decision making moves up the line. So we try to engage in that through written material or actual briefing with the community present. So there are ways that we start with the community and actually end with the community. And that's the way our projects are hopefully mostly designed, in addition to just general capacity development. So thank you.
Great. And Erin, did you want to respond to that? I know you had your hand up, or an earlier point, but then it went down. So making sure that you still have an opportunity. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think that's a really great point, and that's something we've been talking about, I mean, within the ECOP program, but even more broadly is thinking about this kind of matching the user and the scale to each other and having that kind of be networked. And that's something, at least in my role within in the US, we have state Sea Grants. So like I'm part of California Sea Grant, but that's then networked through the national levels. And a large role of that is kind of supporting, having extension specialists on the ground in local communities, working with their different stakeholders, but then also bringing that kind of to the national level stakeholders. And increasingly, I think that this is in my mind, is there's, I think, a large role for having that also be networked internationally. So kind of in my mind, I guess I just wanted to share some of these. And the ECOP program has also been evolving in a similar way, kind of more from the international to the more local levels. I think it's going to take time to trickle to individual, place-based communities. I'm thinking of cities and counties, but I think ideally having that kind of entire spectrum from the local to international scales really networked is an important feature. So I guess just wanted to add that, and something that I think, at least in the conversations that we've been having, is going to be a key piece. So yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. And Peter.
Thank you. One I guess question that we're thinking a lot about on our project is one of our components is to kind of support a bit of a framework for developing community level data collection and decision support programs for community-based fisheries management. And we're looking to integrate climate change adaptation and monitoring into some of the community-based management plans. But also, I think what we see a lot is a focus on catch monitoring, development of kind of catch monitoring programs at the community level. And while fisheries indicators and management is clearly very important, we're really looking for kind of examples of kind of the local use of climate indicators, social indicators, market indicators that might be leading indicators of changing dynamics in the fisheries. So, at the local level, maybe overfishing isn't necessarily a problem throughout the year. But it could be anticipated if price data were were captured and delivered a little bit better to communities, so that they could anticipate some sort of changes in fishing effort, for example, or some other leading indicators. If they start to see maybe a localized bleaching event or what have you. So just kind of, as a theme today, putting out a lot of these questions to the group, but that's kind of what we are really trying to focus on, trying to develop those community level data collection programs that really fit within EAFM, fit within kind of climate smart thinking, and trying to kind of expand the range of data that communities are collecting and using for management. So thank you.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Interesting to think about, kind of expanding modeling to support these kind of projects to be more ecological modeling, not just, fisheries oceanographic data. So that's an interesting point. Vera, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you all for a really exciting series of talks. I think I've heard a common thread in many of the talks, an interest in working with local communities, making our science more applicable to local people, indigenous people. Do you speakers have a recommendation for how we can integrate our science and make it more relevant for communities? Do we have a series of listening sessions, or do we go into the communities and discuss with folks what their needs are? What have you found to be successful in your approaches toward making your science relevant?
I guess I will look to the panel to put your hands up and see if anybody has an answer. But I also welcome any audience members who may have an answer or a comment to make about that question, about approaches that have been successful engaging communities. Oh, I think you're still muted, Stephen, if that's what you're looking for. No, okay. Serena.
Hello. Yeah, I think based on the work that I've been supporting over the last maybe 4 years, I remember when we first started in the program, we kind of went with the traditional, lots of, Twitter and all this in terms of trying to get outreach, and we had to really reassess what was going to be most accessible, I suppose, for the communities. So we ended up actually doing a lot more focus on island engagement workshops where all stakeholders, people from the public can just with interest can come along. And we did talks that were kind of at the level that was accessible, as well as focusing on newspaper articles, which, ended up being the most important thing and the most kind of used media source locally. So in the end, I think when we first started, we were like, we need to use all the latest, Facebook posts, Twitter, and getting the information out there on any of the research in that way. But I think looking at the different communities and ensuring that you focus on what is most used locally as well, because I think sometimes we're not necessarily thinking about what everyone is using and what everyone is most happy with engaging with. So just to say that it's important to understand the local audience before doing a lot of work on Twitter and kind of internet-based work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Peter, did you have a response to Vera's question?
Yeah, thank you. I think at least at the Coastal Resources Center in University of Rhode Island, we've kind of seen a lot of success, locally in the US and also bringing internationally the Sea Grant model, and in particular kind of the extension agent and the value of someone who's working at that interface between communities and science. And really, I guess at heart, it's flipping around the relationship a bit rather than kind of thinking from the perspective of scientists what we or you may think the communities should know. It's asking communities what they want to know, what questions do they have about their resource, and really making yourself available to answer those questions. And to kind of Kush's point earlier, it's not just about providing the information and saying, here it is. It's about the know-how to be able to apply it and kind of staying, kind of providing the support services to really apply that information. So, yeah, so we've seen that a lot. There are some other university systems that have kind of grown around that model. University of Cape Coast, in Ghana in particular. So yeah, we find that to be pretty effective.
Thank you. Sorry, I was recovering my mouse from the other screen. It was lagging. Rebecca, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so, this is a huge aspect of the Ocean Decade, this idea of co-design. And I agree that the threads are all there, and want to reflect on what Peter just said, that I think turning it on its head and really also thinking about capacity of these communities, particularly for these communities like Indigenous communities, where it requires building relationship, but also being conscious of the fact that they're very, there is a lot of work that's already going on. And so you don't want to overburden, but thinking about starting from the place of understanding their priorities, so that then once those priorities are developed and understood, and there's a lot of exchange, then you can, more rapidly identify places to build that capacity and to work with them. And so I think listening sessions are good, but they're not enough, because that's sounds more like a one-time piece of work. It really is about that going into place and really working with and starting early. One of the things we've heard from some of our Indigenous partners is coming in with a last minute request to develop a grant proposal to work with them and to meet those priorities. That's an example where that doesn't work for them, because it does require a lot of capacity mobilization in a short amount of time. So by building that relationship out, then you get that capacity buildup, so that then you can be more responsive to things like funding opportunities. So just thinking through some of those capacity issues is going to be a key piece of this.
Thank you. Savannah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to add to what was said, I think it very much depends. Also, quite often we have a tendency that we go in and we tell people what we want them to know and to do. So I think from my own experience working in with the OTs, as Serena presented, but also in the Caribbean, which is areas which are quite far away sometimes from technology, is go out and have a kind of good talk to people around what their needs are, and try to keep it simple as well. Quite often, for example, when we've been working in the Caribbean, they love to just have TV interviews on the radio. Everybody listens to the radio. And that's something that it sounds very simple, but everybody basically has the radio in the background. So although it might not be as fancy as Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, everybody listens to the radio and everybody will know that. So sometimes for me, what it has worked in our work is just keep it simple, and sometimes even go back to basics. And that really, people appreciate that you're not fancy, but you get done the work and in the way that they need it. So that's something to also reflect on as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah. And Erin.
Yeah, thanks. I guess following up on those two comments, I think the idea of capacity as an issue stands out to me. And I think one of the things that we've thought about is kind of this honoring the local context, maybe building almost, I guess in my mind, it's like a network of knowledge brokers. So people that can really work at those interfaces and finding, because I think, at least for me, even in the past couple of years, having worked this newer role with Sea Grant, one of the things that stands out to me is really it takes time to just build the relationships to start that process. So I think finding people who have those relationships already, and I think that may also potentially alleviate some of these capacity burdens that we're talking about. And I guess I just wanted to bring up one of an idea that just keeps coming up for me, and I feel like these conversations really shed light on it, is having like really truly local, we'll call them local nodes, like sub-regional nodes, getting people, I think place-based connection is really important. So being able to have people kind of around a given place that can kind of easily feel connected to, that are talking about some sort of common goal or issue, whether that be climate, fisheries, kind of the sustainable blue economy at the broadest level, like kind of bringing all those people together. I've been thinking of this in my own town, like, can I just get all the people that work in the maritime communities together just to start talking to each other? So anyways, that was just something I wanted to bring up because these comments made me think of that. So
thank you for that. And does anybody have any? Oh, Stephen, yes, good timing.
Yeah, thanks. This has been a really good discussion. And one thing that I've found is maybe a bit of a hurdle in my thinking is how do we actually identify and initiate those initial contacts with partners. And I don't want to pick on you, Kush, but for example, if we wanted to, partner with people in Mauritius, on fisheries issues, what is the best way that we can go as a program like SmartNet with limited resources and actually initiate some sort of conversation that can lead to co-design? And not just you, but if anyone else has any thoughts or ideas about that.
I can respond to that to start. Yeah, I think they welcome opinions and suggestions. So just reaching out to the Mauritius Oceanography Institute, for example. There's lots of NGOs in the country where people would happily take in opinions and suggestions and collaborations. But as I mentioned, there's this reluctance in making the first step. So, there are lots of people and organizations that you can approach. I'm happy to provide a list for the Indian Ocean region. Yeah.
Does anybody have anything to follow up or add to Stephen's, to support Stephen's question there? Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Erin just said too, that idea of those knowledge brokers or boundary spanners. And this is something we've been thinking about as a Decade Collaborative Center. Can we create a network of people thinking about co-design who are embedded, so that then people like SmartNet or groups like SmartNet can come and talk to that group, and then that group can identify who, you know what I mean? Like, it's a bit of that nested design, but I definitely think if you can identify those people that are able to play that role, which isn't always easy, but you've already done that right now with Kush. So there you go. You had a conversation and you found someone. So that could just be as simply as that,
Yeah, and that's kind of related to Lori's question in the chat as well about, are there organizations that can be supportive of meeting these goals that are not about, direct local engagement with communities, but can kind of play not a gatekeeping role, but a capacity gatekeeping role in terms of not overwhelming communities, but also and directing questions appropriately. Jen.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit provocative here, but looking at this room, we're all scientists and we're asking ways to communicate with non-scientists. And I think we need to have more voices in the room to really be able to understand that. I think as scientists, we try and go it alone a lot and think that we can build these relationships ourselves. But there are whole groups of people that are trained specifically in things like relationship building. And I think that they should be part of the conversation, and we should rely on their advice as we move forward as well.
Thank you, Louis.
I'd like to respond to this comment from Lori regarding global indigenous groups. Unfortunately, my experience with them has not been very good, because as a global indigenous group, they have an agenda. And their agenda is fairly large, very high scale, very, very governmental. And they tend to forget that the impacts of what we're trying to do is felt locally. So I have had my reluctance. There are good ways to use them, but I wouldn't use them to reach to the local level. And what has been successful at APN is local scientists, giving them the opportunity to look at their local communities. And when we go out, or not we actually, when they go out talking to the communities, to the fish, those who engaged in fisheries or food or other types of food security, they're talking to one of their own. They're talking to each other. We are providing or facilitating that. And that's where I think I prefer to be in that role, to be the facilitator of those things and not to be actually engaging in them, because I don't know their situation. I don't understand when someone says, how far do you go to get your fish? Oh, maybe a half a day's boat ride. That's their scale of things. It's not 10 kilometers. They time it based on how long it takes for them to get there. We have to understand the way they think. And that's how it helps to have someone from that country, from that region, maybe even from that community, through NGOs, academic institutions, that can facilitate that way better than we can. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Savannah.
Yeah, just very similar along the lines of what Louis was saying. Some of our recent work, for example, with the fishermen in Belize, we went to the cooperatives because they speak the language, they know each other. Often they are families that work together. So as scientists, we all like to come and have a go, but I think sometimes that could not be the most effective way. So often I think I would suggest the same kind of experience, use the local people and try to get somebody to be the bridge, I guess, somebody that is, you know, local, speaks the language, knows the people, and try to present the things in a very simple way to try to open doors, and then always try to, you know, bring the elements together to make sure that not only that things are simple, but again, I think that they can relate to what the problem you're telling them or you're trying to fix here. That's my own experience as well. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that. We have to restrain ourselves because we're very enthusiastic on getting results. And in a local community, that result may not happen at the end of the week. So we have to be patient and we have to kind of step back from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Alan.
Hi, yeah, thanks everyone for the thoughtful and insightful discussion and comments. Really, really fantastic. One thing, I've worked a lot in Alaska, and we have a lot of data, and it's a relatively data-rich world. And we've done a lot of efforts to go out and talk to different indigenous communities and small fishing communities and talk about the things that they want to know. But our response to some degree as scientists has been to say, here's all this information. And I think we've kind of flooded people with knowledge. And I guess I think I really like, you know, Jennifer, your comment about, you know, talking about better communication. I think kind of in the SmartNet context, something that I think we really can, like having these, you know, the agents in the Sea Grant model, people who understand these systems who can help, you know, facilitate the knowledge flow is a key part of this. But I think through the network, I think there's a real challenge for us to try to identify what are some of the commonalities so that we can take some of the key scientific knowledge that we have and then, you know, have a system where we can provide that to those types of outreach folks and then to end users. And I think over the next few years in SmartNet, one of the things we have to work hard to do is to really figure out what some of those key questions and challenges are so that we can prioritize those and not flood people with you know, lots of information that is distracting from, okay, here are the key things that can really help us make a difference to people's, you know, core concerns. Thanks.
Serena, do you have something to add?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to make a small point as well, linked to pretty much what everyone, Alan, Savannah, and New were just talking about. I mean, we spent a lot of time, probably in the last year and a half now, with I always talk about St. Helena just because of my work area, but with the on-island team, just they always talked about, you know, getting given advice reports and things and figures, but actually not feeling connected to the process and the analysis. So we've spent a lot of resource recently in developing things like shiny tools and apps, so that on island they have direct access to the databases. When they get questions from the fishermen or other stakeholders, they can immediately, you know, they know how to interact. They don't have to do any R coding, which, you know, is a bit daunting sometimes if you're not used to it or doing it every week. And it allows them to you know, have direct access to the information so that they can respond. They don't have to come to us and say, well, oh, someone's asked us how much, you know, what's the average size in month of yellowfin. They can get to their data and they can use it effectively. So putting effort into things like apps and shiny tools and things that really equip people on islands to understand standard, work with the information that they even collect, has been really important. So just thought I'd flag that.
Thank you, Serena. So we're having a lot of these conversations about engaging locally, and I guess for a global program like SmartNet, it's hard to think about planning from this very hyper local needs and concerns and building up to a global scale perspective. But I guess I'm just wondering if, because we have it's so hard to make kind of generalizations across localities, local needs, local concerns. I wonder if instead we might think about, values and principles for how these engagements work, or, guidelines for, and this is kind of aimed also towards SmartNet organizers, about thinking through, what are the values that you want to use to guide these conversations, and what are the outcomes that are open enough to local engagement and prioritization that still help meet a global understanding and scale up to a global understanding of the program. I see a comment from a hand raised here, so I don't, that you don't have to respond to me directly, but this is something to think about, I guess. Vera, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I was recently at a conference on the Washington coast, and there were a number of tribal folks who were there, and, members of the community, and the scientists spoke with slides that were very heavy on data and just really getting down into the weeds and the detail. And as I looked across the room, and this one woman was making her basket, I was thinking, how much does she really get of the science that we're presenting here? And so I think it's going to be really important in the future to make our science accessible, to know who our audience is when we're speaking, and to really try to be inclusive in the way we present our science. And, I think we can take small steps. We can invite folks to meetings like this to say, what do you want? What are your perspectives? Making small steps into a future where the science is more inclusive.
Yeah, thank you. Savannah? And I'm mindful of time. We're getting close to the hour.
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly.
I'll ask you to be.
Yeah, no, very quickly. Just taking on your point about values, I think the motivation is really important here. Quite often, for example, when we go to places in the middle of nowhere, we just start with one picture. If it's a fisherman, it will be fish, or it'll be a plate of food, or whatever that person needs from that science, rather than we telling them that they need to do stock assessment and protection. I think we just need to very much keep in a vocabulary that's simple. Recent experience for us in Turks and Caicos, going to work with the fishermen. Everybody hates to document the catch. Logbooks is a problem. You come with a phone and you say, we have this app. Oh, they're interested. Because that's something that everybody has a phone, for example, and everybody wants to communicate. So again, I think we just need to observe what motivates people to engage with us. And I think from there, we started the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. And Erin, it might be that you get the final word today.
All right, I'll be quick.
Well,
yeah, I think just building off of at least this value of inclusivity, that's something that, at least as I mentioned within the ECOP program, we were looking for this kind of common goal, even though it might manifest differently in local contexts. And I mean, I think one thing that was fascinating to us was there were regional differences, at least from the survey, of input, but the unique thing was that overwhelmingly, regardless of where people were, kind of this idea of change and climate change and the effect on their communities came out as something kind of to rally around globally, even if it manifests differently in local context. So I guess just thinking about, to me, those things, I think there's a way to kind of honor that local context while still having this more international, broad shared goals. And that can be a point of connection across regions. So I guess just something kind of to add about that value of inclusivity, but also there might be ways to go about that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as scientists, we get wrapped up in data, but we forget that the data is there to support telling a story, and storytelling is really universal. So sometimes I think we get really you know, there's some basic stories we can tell about why we're interested in certain things or curious about certain things. And I think that's always an interesting approach to take. Certainly can engage differently, even if we're talking about the same group of people around. But now, thank you so much for, and I'm mindful of the time here for this conversation. I think this is obviously a topic we could collectively speak to for quite a while, but I'll turn it to Joran to kind of wrap up our event.
Thank you very much. And I needed to hold myself a little bit back here to allow all the others to speak, because there's so many great points, and I mean, so many things that I have been working on. I'm trying now to wrap up an event that is of course very hard to wrap up in a way. Let me see, I try to prepare. What part of my screen are you seeing actually? Do you see the presentation?
We're seeing the speaker mode. I think if you
I think we're seeing it.
Slideshow, there you go.
Yeah, no.
Now you can see it?
Now
we're seeing it in speaker view now.
Okay.
There you go. Swap screens. There you go.
There you go. Wonderful. So thank you very, very, very much to everyone. That have been very stimulating, very short snapshots of all your initiatives. And the discussion was really, really wonderful. I think I try to capture the breadth of all the presentations in a way, and then go into the discussion that we had, because I think that the discussion at the end very nicely focused on the real challenge that we are facing. But very briefly, I think that there were a lot of key phrases that came out through all the presentations. You know, holistic view on the system thinking, inter and transdisciplinary approaches, and then very central, of course, at the end, bringing in communities engagement. We're talking about inclusion, empowerment, ownerships. We have been talking about different knowledge systems, and also the challenge of bringing in different knowledge systems, because knowledge is not necessarily only facts, but it's also values, it's beliefs, it's spirituality. We've been talking about collaborative learning, knowledge co-production, and how do we connect these different knowledge sources. We talked about diversity, we talked about climate resilience, we talked about capacity sharing and training, and of course, very importantly, also funding. And I think what I made out of that is some questions that actually were quite nicely addressed in parts by the discussion already. So the question on how to build meaningful connections. We heard about network of networks and knowledge networks. We heard about how to engage the community. So the question is, how do we connect across the different spatial and also temporal scales? We heard about the challenge of communities operating in a different pace than we are normally used to work in the scientific field, where we sometimes only have 3-year projects or 4-year projects. But how could you build something on a long term through that funding? And also the necessity, if you want to develop something with the communities and you want to engage with the communities, the funding normally starts when your proposal is accepted. It doesn't start when creating the proposal. So the funding also needs to change, or the funding systems, and I think we see that slowly changing. How can we connect different topical fields? We have heard about, food provision, livelihoods, conservation. We haven't heard a lot about, mobility, or a lot about energy production, for example. But I mean, how can we bring these things together? Because the connection of all these different topics are probably the issue that the communities have and they are facing. Health is a very big issue when you're talking about or talking with actually local communities. And how can we support capacity sharing, development, and training? I think this is an interesting point. A lot of the discussion was around, how can we ensure that we actually get the connection with the communities? There's a myriad of initiatives out there. This myriad of initiatives is often in the field of development aid, and is not very connected to the science or the research areas. There has been billions and trillions of dollars spent on development aid, which just ended up in nowhere in a way, because they never try to develop that in connection with monitoring what is actually valuable and where could solutions be found. So I think there's a value maybe in connecting more with the development aid landscape or seascape of organizations. And how can we improve equity and opportunities in a very asymmetric seascape across countries? We heard the challenges, and I think, Kush, I really appreciated you being very open about the challenges that you're facing. And a lot of those challenges is, of course, something that programs like SmartNet cannot easily overcome. So the question is, of course, how can we support working on that? And how can we, add on maybe improving some of the equity? Oops, that was a little bit quick. So then at the end, when I'm trying to summarize the discussions, so maybe what we could do is, on a higher level, is we can identify key principles. I like that very much, Catherine, about, not thinking about, or using the idea of key principles rather than, trying to figure something out that is too diverse in the context. But, what are the commonalities? Where can we learn from each other? And can we provide a platform for this learning? So providing training through partnerships is something that we heard we can also already support. We do have training programs that we can build on, and we can increase that, improve that through partnerships, so that the training is also reaching beyond kind of our, let's say, privileged, Western scientist world. Providing a sustained infrastructure for cooperation. I think we heard that it's really important to continue the cooperation, to continue the engagement, and to provide ability to actually have this, sustained cooperation and build on and connecting existing initiatives. A lot of what you presented are excellent initiatives, and I think that there are very, very many brilliant initiatives out there on the different aspects that we heard about. So community-supported observation and data collection. We heard about connecting different knowledge systems. We heard about community and stakeholder engagement. We heard about knowledge brokerage. I think the role that SmartNet can play is to bring different experiences together, the lessons learned, to identify how can we learn from each other to support initiatives and also, kickstart. Peter made a very good point in how do we reach out in very overcrowded areas? Because there's a lot of organizations and initiatives out there. How can we make an added benefit, or how can we provide an added benefit? So I think what we could provide is the means of bringing the people together and cooperate and provide, for example, through dedicated workshops, these opportunities to exchange, and then providing the platform to continue the cooperation, continue the partnerships, and also taking up the ideas that are coming from your initiatives, also from the local communities, because you're kind of the more direct link. And I like the idea about the knowledge broker. I don't like the idea of a gatekeeper that much, I have to say. I'm very much like the idea of a facilitator. So you're facilitating the connection between the local communities and then the kind of organizations like ICES-PICES, which are in their nature, of course, are operating on a different scale. So I think that this might be a means of linking across the scales. And then having partners like concrete institutions, Kush, for example, as you mentioned, the ones, bringing them in and allowing them to also participate in expert groups that are dealing with topics that they are dealing with. And so bringing them in contact with the larger international community. So that was a lot of information, and I think you brought in a lot of information. What we did hear very, very loud is that we do need to engage more with the people that we're talking about, and we really want to do that, but we need you to facilitate that. And I think that is very clear, because we need to have an entry point. And as we are aware of a lot of these initiatives, I think one of the first steps might actually be to organize a workshop on one of these topics and then bring these initiatives together and then exchange on what are the experiences, and then and then have that continued dialogue on that topic and really communicate that back. And I could just continue talking because it's just such an that was a really energizing event, I think. But I'm aware of time. We're running out of time, so I would like to thank you very, very much. If you have any specific idea about, oh, I really would like to see this, coming to life, a workshop on community support observation, we're actually working on that one. So that might come earlier than you expect. But for some of the others, we need to also have your engagement and your input into bringing them to life. So with that, I think I stop sharing so that everyone can see each other again, not my boring slides anymore. And thank you very much. And staying in contact, please leave your contact, get in contact with us. You have the emails, I think, and you have the web pages. So please stay in contact, and we are more than happy to continue the good cooperation. Thanks a lot. And I think I don't know if anyone else wants to have